Hi everyone, today I have a special podcast which is a book review and recommendation of the book titled John Lennon v. the USA, written by Leon Wilds. Leon Wilds has been practicing for probably half a century and has numerous published articles and was also a former ILP president. The book is a detailed breakdown of what he went through as the immigration attorney for John Lennon and Yoko Ono during their deportation proceedings. This book details with examples of what a great immigration attorney is. It's a must-read for anyone in law school or any attorney interested in getting involved in the field of immigration law, as well as practicing immigration lawyers. Welcome to the Immigration Lawyers Podcast. I am the host, Attorney John Khosravi, and I practice U.S. immigration law exclusively. For more information about the program, please visit www.immigrationlawyerspodcast.com. Please note that this recording is informational only and does not constitute legal advice. Please consult with a licensed attorney for specific legal guidance that suits your case. Also, this recording is copyrighted and written permission is required for rebroadcasting. For more information about me, please visit www.jqqlaw.com. Hi everyone, thanks for tuning in. Today I'm really excited to talk about the book John Lennon v. the United States by Leon Wilds. I picked it up after seeing interviews with attorney Leon Wilds and his son Michael Wilds. And once I got the book, I couldn't put it down. So it's one of those readings you should definitely get to right now. As I said in the intro, it's great for law students interested in immigration law and attorneys interested in getting involved in immigration law. Because the first thing you notice in the book is the John Lennon case touched upon almost every aspect of immigration proceedings, and the book discusses it. So it's a great overview of what immigration entails. A lot of people think immigration is just about deportation hearings, but it touches upon all the other areas and the level of attorney knowledge that's necessary, and it touches upon the areas of the law that immigration touches upon as well, like crimmigration, criminal law immigration, and other forms of federal practice. And I'll actually go through right now the various aspects of immigration law that were discussed in the book. First of all, it talks about B tourist visas, which John Lennon had to get to come. He had to get a waiver, so it discusses the 212 waiver. Later on, he files for an EB1. At the time, I think it was called a third preference visa, but the EB1A, extraordinary ability and talent, employment-based green card, which he and his wife both got. There's issues of crimmigration with regards to John Lennon's previous criminal history. He had to do an extension of status in the U.S., Form I-539, probably was a different form at the time. Talk about voluntary departure, post-conviction relief, motions to reconsider, immigration proceedings before an IJ, an immigration judge, challenging removability, then going into federal litigation, including mandamus claims. And there's also potential marriage-based green card issues and adjustment, challenging the removability at that point. Board of Immigration Appeals, BIA, there's U.S. Court of Appeals and Remands, FOIA requests. All these were in there. It's a long and complicated case. And normally, most clients wouldn't be able to do all this. It didn't hurt that John Lennon, as it comes out in the book, was making a ton of money even in that time. Probably, if you do inflation adjusted, he was making hundreds of $millions a year. But I'll talk about this later. Super down-to-earth guy for a guy that was making that kind of money. So if you read this book as a non-immigration attorney, it'll really help you understand what immigration law is involved in and the amount of lawyering, both on transactional type of immigration law and the litigation side that goes down, and the tactical stuff you have to do, kind of like a chess player, always anticipating what's going to happen next, and the importance of having familiarity with the people involved and the scenarios involved, so you're not uncomfortable going into something or unaware of what's potentially there. A lot of times in this, and because Attorney Wilds is so experienced, he was anticipating a lot of the things that are happening. He knew the key players involved and who he was up against and how they would handle things and where he could put pressure and where he can't. And also he had friends and colleagues in various fields that could help him, especially in federal practice, which might need, and it did in this case, some help with the motions and writing those up. But after doing a quick review of all the case type of immigration law work, I want to go back to the most important part for me in the book, was actually in the intro, and it was written by Mr. Wilds' son, Michael Wilds, who himself is an established and very famous immigration attorney. He talks about two important things his father imparted on him and taught him. which I personally thought was important, and just having it reiterated here was very important. And I want everyone to hear this, like really take this to heart. The two most important things his father taught him, one was scholarship and one was ethics. So ethics, obviously, you got to do it the right way. And there's examples of this here in that with regards to ethics, for example, when Mr. Wilds went to meet Yoko Ono and John Lennon to discuss their case, he didn't scare them into hiring him. He just laid down the facts and let them make a decision. He didn't do any high sales pressure. Obviously John Lennon lived in a expensive home. The people who introduced him were fancy, record people. He could have tried to skew it and try to push the issue of getting hired, but he just put the information down and let them decide. Also, when he laid out their options, there was stuff that were kind of basic, like getting the waiver and doing stuff like that. And he said the previous attorney who did it could continue doing it. They didn't necessarily need to hire Mr. Wilds. So he wasn't, again, trying to pressure them to change their attorney and hire him. He just said if you want to do more complex stuff that I'm more familiar with, that the other attorney did it, which just did more simpler kind of immigration stuff, then he could do it. And so he didn't put that high pressure sales. And I know when it comes to law firms and just sales in general, you're always trying to close ABC, always be closing. But in my practice, I just don't like that. This is an important personal issue for people, and it's the same medicine and law. I don't believe you should hard sell people to close a deal to work with you. You should put the information out there, let them know what their options are, what you could do for them, and what the scenarios are, and let them make the decision. And Mr. Wilds shows that here as part of one example of his ethics. But more importantly, for me right now, especially in light of the podcast I'm doing and what I try to do, which is talk about law and study rules and the regulations and the case law and see how we could help everybody out. And in continuing my education, every time there's a new regulation coming from the federal government, is scholarship. And scholarship here is the idea of academic study or achievement or learning of a high level. So in immigration law, because our practice is constantly changing, and every day there's an email from USCIS saying there's a new regulation, there's an update onto various different parts. One day TPS is renewed in one area, one day the employment-based categories are updated and how the non-immigrant visas are handled. One day there's a memo on I-751's removal of conditions and how they're analyzed. So it's important that every day as an immigration attorney you sit down and study it. You can't just study it once and let it go. And again, this could be seen in Mr. Wilds' dedication to continuously studying the law, finding nuances in it, getting information and analyzing it. He went so far to study English law to see how he could fix the criminal issue John Lennon had in England. This is as a U.S. attorney taking the time to study English law. Now, one technique, somewhat of a marketing technique I'm taking away from this book, which I'm using now, and I recommend you do as well, is that when Mr. Wilds went to meet with John Lennon and Yoko Ono, I don't know if the INA was out at that time, but whatever the regulations were with them. And when he was talking with them, he opened it up and read from the book as its authority to go through the case with him. And so I went ahead and, off AILA, bought the Immigration Nationality Act and the CFR, 8 CFR, and the other CFR sections. And I'm going to use that in my consultation. So when I'm going over, for example, an EB-1 extraordinary ability case, I'll go open the book and go through that with him just to show, I know where the law is, what the law is, and I'll go through them piece by piece. So I'm a thorough person. So that was a little thing I picked up by appealing to authority. It's a persuasion technique to show that you know what the rules are, where they are, and how to get them, and you're going through them thoroughly with a client. Another practical tip that came from the book is not being afraid to file federal lawsuits. In John Lennon's case, the government was constantly stonewalling and not adjudicating cases, just sitting on them or not giving information. Mr. Wilds found this out and he pushed the government on their tricks and sued them all the way up the chain and was able to push back and get what he needed done. And maybe I should stop right here and I give you a little rundown of what happened in the book. John Lennon had entered the United States on a tourist visa at the time. It seems like a tourist visa, but he was semi-working. They didn't have the O visa at the time, which probably would have been the appropriate one in this case. So he was here with his wife, and he had what was considered a drug possession charge in England, which was challenged later on. And because of that, he had to get a waiver to come in. However, John Lennon had and this is during the Vietnam War, he had gone to many anti-war protests and was becoming the face of the anti-war movement. And because of how influential he was and how much respect he had from people and how much people listened to him, it caught the ire of the federal government, the executive branch, Nixon administration, various senators, and they literally got together, and now the documents show, to get him out of the country, to do what they can to prevent him from influencing the United States citizens and their opinion of the war. So they pushed this deportation proceeding, removal proceedings, and through the process, when Attorney Wilds kept trying to fight him on it and keep him here, they would do stuff like not adjudicate stuff, not give him information, just really sinister stuff. To me, it's malicious prosecution, or really it should be legal what they did. But luckily, John Lennon had a good lawyer that pushed back on them. And again, as I go back to my previous comment, wasn't afraid to file federal lawsuits and take it to them and challenge them and do the work that's necessary to push back. Now again, the client had the money to do this, but it was good lawyering. It set good precedent. For example, through the pressure Attorney Wilds did on the government, they found out that the INS at the time, the Immigration Service at the time, had a system that we call it now prosecutorial discretion or deferred action, but some cases where they weren't a priority, they would not pursue. It wasn't a public system, it was an internal thing, but he forced them through his techniques to be able to give information on this, and he developed they gave him all the cases eventually. He analyzed them, spent a lot of time, did law reviews, and informed people, immigration attorneys all across America, that this program exists for non-priority deportation removal cases that could be used. And there was a precursor to the deferred action program we have now, DACA. So that was a gift Mr. Wilds gave us and John Lennon gave us together by helping so many people, especially deferred action, people who came as children and really had no say in their future and were forced to come to the U.S. and now have to grow up here and become a U.S. Person for all intents and purposes. Now, interestingly, back in the day, and probably 20, 30 years ago, before the lockbox system, the service centers system changed all of that, immigration attorneys would go face-to-face to a USCIS field office and deal with most of the case directly with the director, the field office director, or their officers, and was able to fix everything up. So you had a personal relationship with these officers. Now, there's good and bad to that, because if you have a bad relationship with them, it can hurt your case. But it allowed some leeway. When I speak with older attorneys here in Los Angeles who used to have this system, it was very interesting because they can go and talk to the officer in the interview, and the officers had a lot of authority, and they could help things out if the case wasn't perfect. So that was cool. But at the same time, I hear people used to have to go downtown and wait in line just to pick up a form or to file something, which is a big hassle. So it's much easier having that stuff online for free now. One other practice management tip I got from the book, which is very important, and I think it's going to help everyone who practices in any field of law, but any field of law, any kind of attorney. And that's when we get a new consultation and we are hoping to get a case and to sign a contract and to make our fees and our income, we always worry about how much we're saying we're going to charge, how we came off during the consultation, if we came off confident, if we dressed nice, if the client liked us. There's a million and one things that'll come to our mind. For example, if the case doesn't go through, not the case doesn't go through, but the client doesn't hire you for the case. An interesting tidbit here was, in reality, you never know why the client hired you or what it was that tipped them off. They might say, I saw your reviews, or I like that you knew what you're talking about, which could be the reason. But for example, in this case, at the end of the book, Yoko tells Mr. Wilds that, they weren't sure about which immigration attorney to choose because so many had been interviewed with them. But the decision to go with him was based on nothing other than the tarot card reading that Yoko had with her spiritual consultant that made her choose to have Mr. Wilds as the attorney. So that's something that, I talked about earlier about having the regulations in front of him, reading it off, and his years of experience and being introduced by people and their former attorney and people they respected, all that in one place. The reason why they closed the deal with him was because of a tarot card reader. So don't put too much worry and thought if someone doesn't hire you of why they didn't. It's kind of like if you're going on a date and the date doesn't call you back and someone, what was there something wrong? Did my breath smell? Is my hair not nice? You never know what the reason is someone is going to hire you or not. Now, if you're constantly not getting hired, you need to change something. But if one or two don't happen, or 3 or 4, don't kill yourself about it. In all, this was a great book, a great read, great story, and serves as a good standard for immigration attorneys to compare their level of client advocacy against. And finally, a quick note, which is not about law, but about John Lennon himself. I've always been a huge fan of his music, the Beatles. I play the guitar. I like to play classic rock and that genre of music. And what I love, I've seen his the Beatles Circus Soleil show in Las Vegas, and it was excellent. I recommend if you're into the Beatles or like that kind of music, to definitely go check it out. But my respect for him grew exponentially more than just his music, to see the stance he took regarding the war in Vietnam and about political freedom and free speech and just against these war hawks that want to constantly bomb and kill everybody. And he had a lot to lose. And if I was an immigration attorney, I would respect it. But now, and I don't practice removal anymore, but when I would go to removal proceedings and seeing how much stress it is on a person to have to go in front of an IJ and deal with motions and not understanding what's going on, to what he put himself to go through, and I could appreciate the intensity and the distress it caused him, and never turning back on his words and keep the push going for people's freedom and freedom of speech and anti-war stance. It really touched me to see this guy had all the money in the world. He could have done whatever he wanted and partied and had no problems, but he decided to put his neck on the line. And it just, my respect for him has grown tremendously since that time. And really what happened after reading the book is I remembered his assassination. It was actually kind of depressing for me, and it stayed with me after reading the book for some time in my head, of just like the fact that he was assassinated, and good guys who stand for truth eventually have this happen to them, and it's a cost that happens. But his spirit lives on, and it's not only the music and everything else he did, as I talked about earlier, with the help of Attorney Wilds, he was able to create or publicize the Deferred Action and Prosecutor Discretion Program, which has helped so many people stay in the U.S. and not have to go to deportation proceedings, especially when they have no criminal record, their whole family's here, and they might not have a home in a country to go back to. Thanks for listening. I hope you enjoyed it. Please leave me comments on iTunes, on YouTube, or wherever you heard it, and feel free to email me back at info@jqqlaw.com if you had any comments or questions. I'd love to hear back from you. Please like it and leave reviews. I would be very appreciated. Thank you so much. Have a great one.